What if every memory you held dear was quietly erasing itself, one smile at a time? Claire hadn't planned to come back. Not really. When the call came, her mother's voice silenced forever, her father's heart giving out just weeks later. She felt relief mixed with grief, like someone had pulled the ground from under her and left her floating. The house waited at the end of a long gravel drive, the kind of place that could never belong to anyone else. Weather-worn shutters clung to sagging windows. Vines crept along the sides like veins spreading through a body. She parked her car and sat for a moment, hands gripping the wheel, staring at the warped front porch. She could almost see herself as a child again, barefoot summers, scraped knees, her father's camera flashing as her mother fussed with her hair. The house hadn't aged well, but the weight it carried hadn't lessened. When she finally stepped inside, the smell hit her first. Old wood, dust, faint mildew, and something sour lurking just beneath. It was the smell of time, but it clung too heavily, like the house itself exhaled rot. The living room looked exactly as it had in her memory, floral couch, yellowed lampshades, her father's old recliner angled toward the TV. A photo album sat on the coffee table, edges curled from years of handling. Claire froze. She remembered that album. Her mother had guarded it like treasure, flipping through it on holidays, insisting on reliving every moment captured on film. She brushed dust from the cover and opened it. Her breath caught. The first page showed a birthday party, her 5th, if she remembered correctly. The cake was shaped like a castle, pink frosting dripping down the sides. She sat in the center, gap-toothed grin wide. But her mother, who had been standing at her shoulder with a proud smile, wasn't there. Just an empty space, a faint outline where she should have been, as if the photo had been carelessly erased. Claire frowned and flipped to another page. Christmas morning, presents piled high, her father crouched in a ridiculous Santa hat. Except, he wasn't there. His stocking still hung on the mantel, his presents still in the corner, but the man himself had vanished from the picture. Her chest tightened. No. I remember these. They were full. Everyone was there. Page after page, the photos blurred, distorted. People disappeared. Smiling cousins, neighborhood kids, her parents. By the time she reached the middle of the album, only Claire remained, standing alone at parties, opening gifts by herself, laughing at something that no longer had an audience. The house was silent except for her ragged breathing. A floorboard creaked above her. Claire's head snapped up. She wasn't alone. Claire hears movement upstairs in the house she thought was empty. Claire's heartbeat thudded so violently she thought it might echo through the house and announce her presence. Every instinct screamed to run, to throw open the door and flee back to her car, back to the comfort of the outside world where reality still made sense. But her feet moved of their own accord, carrying her toward the narrow staircase that led to the second floor. The wood groaned under each step, the sound swallowed instantly by the heavy silence of the house. The upper hall was dimly lit by a single, crooked window at the far end, where dust motes drifted in the pale light like floating ghosts. The air smelled different here, older, fouler, heavier. As she climbed, she felt it, a weight pressing down on her chest, a pull that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Her father's old portraits lined the hall. Family faces stared down, smiling, frozen forever. But something was off. Eyes glimmered too brightly. Smiles curved slightly too wide. The longer she looked, the more they seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. A soft whisper came from the master bedroom at the end of the hallway. Almost imperceptible. A syllable, like someone calling her name. "CL, Claire." She froze, every hair on her arms standing on end. The voice sounded like her mother's, but distant, twisted, layered with something else she couldn't name. A part of her mind screamed that she was imagining it, hallucinating from shock and grief. But a logical mind would never have felt the dread curling in her stomach, the way the air seemed to tighten around her like invisible hands. Her hand hovered over the doorknob. It was cold, ice creeping up her wrist. The whispers came again, this time more insistent, a chorus of voices she thought she knew but couldn't place, her father's baritone, her mother's soft lilt, the giggle of her younger self. "Claire, don't forget us." With trembling fingers, she pushed the door open. The room looked empty at first glance. Sunlight slanted through the half-closed blinds, dust motes sparkling like tiny stars. But the old dresser was open. Photo albums. Stacks of prints fanned across the bed, scattered as though someone, or something, had been looking for them. Claire picked up one of the photographs. Her childhood bedroom. And once again, she saw it, herself in the picture, alone this time, her parents erased entirely. A sudden movement in the corner made her gasp. The shadows there seemed too dense, too liquid. She blinked, and it was gone. The whispers escalated, a layered chorus of names and soft laughter, overlapping so that it became impossible to distinguish one voice from another. It was calling her, coaxing her closer to the center of the room. She took a step, then another, unable to resist the pull, until she was standing over a single photograph lying on the floor. Her breath caught. It wasn't a picture of her childhood. It was a current photo, freshly developed, of herself standing in the hallway, staring straight at the camera. And yet, she had not taken this photograph. The edges of the print rippled. The image shifted. Her reflection wavered, a subtle distortion at first, then a horrifying clarity. Behind her in the photo, two figures stood. Pale, featureless, twisted like shadows of people she had loved. She recognized the posture, the tilt of a head, her mother and father, but their faces were blurred, eaten away like ink dissolving in water. She dropped the photograph, stumbling backward. The whispers had become screams, a cacophony of voices yelling, crying, laughing, all at once. The floor beneath her feet trembled slightly. The door slammed shut behind her with a deafening crack. Claire's hands shook as she fumbled with the doorknob. Locked. She rattled it, screamed at it, and then froze. From the shadows of the room came a slow, deliberate clap. One hand, pale and featureless, emerged from the darkness, followed by another. Finally, the voice said. It was her mother's. And yet it was not. It was hollow, elongated, echoing unnaturally in the corners of the room. You've seen the photographs, now you belong to them. The air grew thick, sticky, almost liquid. The walls seemed to bend inward, breathing, pulsating, as though the house itself were alive, hungry for her. Claire backed toward the window, praying it would open, praying she could leap to safety, but the shadows surged forward, coiling like smoke around her legs, anchoring her in place. Her eyes darted to the floor, and then she saw it, the photographs on the carpet were moving. Faces shifting. Blank spaces where figures once stood were filling with darkness, the images consuming themselves, rewriting the memories. The whispers rose into a shriek, "We are the house. We take the photographs. And you are the last one left." A hand shot out from the wall, or was it the shadows themselves, grasping her ankle? She fell, tumbling across the bed, and the last thing she saw before being dragged into darkness was the camera lens of a photograph on the dresser turning slowly toward her, as if the picture itself were alive and watching. Claire is dragged into the shadows as the house's power over the photographs grows, suggesting she may soon vanish from all memory. Claire woke with a start on the cold hardwood floor of the master bedroom, the taste of dust and iron in her mouth. The shadows had retreated, for now, leaving only the trembling remnants of a nightmare she couldn't fully recall, but the photographs were still scattered across the bed and floor. Every image seemed to shimmer faintly under the half-lit blinds, the faces within rippling as though they were breathing beneath the paper. She swallowed hard, pressing her hands to her ears, trying to block out the soft murmurs that had returned, curling around the edges of the room. The first photograph she picked up made her fingers go numb. It was a family portrait from her teenage years, the frame of her bedroom and the background unmistakable. Her parents smiled at the camera, younger than she remembered them, full of warmth. But then, slowly, impossibly, the images shifted. The corner of her mother's mouth blurred, her father's eyes hollowed out like tunnels. Claire gasped and dropped the photograph. The faces weren't just fading, they were vanishing completely. She turned toward the dresser, hoping for a clue, a lifeline, anything tangible to anchor her sanity. Her hands hovered over the scattered prints and albums. One album caught her eye, the newest, untouched by time, a leather-bound compilation that hadn't been on the table yesterday. With trembling hands, she opened it. Her breath caught in her throat. The pages were filled exclusively with photographs of herself. At first glance, everything seemed normal, her smiling face, her childhood antics, candid snapshots from birthdays, graduations, summer trips. But as she flipped each page, she noticed a pattern. Pieces of her body were vanishing. Not all at once, just small details, a hand blurred into nothingness, a foot dissolving into the white margin, an eye flickering like a faulty photograph in an old film reel. By the time she reached the center of the album, her entire body in the pictures had become a ghostly outline, her smile dimming with each turn of the page. It was no longer a record of her life, it was a blueprint of her erasure. Panic clawed at her chest. She threw the album across the room. It landed face down with a thud, but the soft whispers began again, louder this time, more insistent. They called her name. Not gently, but like a litany, a chant repeated in every pitch of every familiar voice she had ever known. Claire. 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 Her eyes darted to the hallway. The shadows moved again, crawling along the walls like ink spilled in water. She tried to run, but the air thickened, sticking to her skin. The house itself seemed to pulse, breathing around her, shifting subtly so that the hallway stretched impossibly long, the doors warped. She stumbled, heart hammering, as the whispers coalesced into a single, sinister voice. You belong to the photographs now. Soon, nothing will remember you but us. The dresser rattled violently, spilling more photographs onto the floor. Claire scrambled to pick one up, and froze. It wasn't a picture of her childhood, or any memory she could recognize. It was the present. She stood in the center of the frame, in the very bedroom she occupied now, staring directly at the camera. But her face was not smiling, it was gone. Blank, featureless, a smear of pale white where her identity should have been. A chill ran down her spine. She dropped the photograph and spun around. The shadows in the corners of the room had thickened, pooling on the floor like liquid. Slowly, shapes began to rise from the darkness, humanoid but distorted, their edges blurred as if the house was forming them from memory itself. One by one, they took on features familiar to her, twisted caricatures of her parents, her childhood friends, even strangers she vaguely remembered. Claire stumbled backward, heart hammering. She reached for the door, and it wasn't there. The wall stretched seamlessly, swallowing the doorway as if it had never existed. She turned to the window, desperate, only to find the glass reflecting a room she did not recognize. The walls were lined with more photographs, hundreds of them, all of her. But in each, she was vanishing further, fading from memory, becoming less herself with every second. She backed toward the center of the room, trying to ground herself, and that's when she noticed the faint outline of words forming on the walls, curling in a wet, almost living script. The last one remains. The last one will feed the house. A low hum vibrated through the floorboards, and the photographs on the dresser began to twitch, as though alive. They shifted positions, turning pages themselves, and with each turn, the images of her flickered, disappeared, and reappeared differently, sometimes smiling, sometimes screaming, sometimes featureless. The house was rewriting her memory, replacing it with its own version, an endless loop of vanishing. Claire screamed, but the sound felt distant, swallowed by the weight of the room. The shadows reached for her again, sticky, persistent, as the photographs leapt from the dresser and scattered across the floor, circling her like a living swarm. Every whisper, every scream, every soft, sad laughter she had ever known in this house merged into one unbearable chorus. And then she realized the truth. This was not a house that simply consumed photographs. It consumed people. Step by step, image by image, memory by memory. Every face in every frame had been eaten until only one remained. And now, that one was her. Her knees buckled, and she fell to the floor, clutching her head. The shadows closed in, the photographs crawling up the walls, twisting reality until the room was unrecognizable. She was alone, but she knew she wasn't. She could feel the presence of every vanished person, lingering just beyond perception, eyes fixed on her, waiting. The last thing she saw before darkness swallowed her was a single photograph floating midair, her own face grinning up at her, featureless, erased, waiting to replace her in the real world. Claire realizes the house isn't just changing the photographs, it's erasing her from reality itself. Every memory, every detail of herself is being devoured. Claire woke not in the master bedroom, but in the hallway, sprawled across the warped hardwood floor. The room she had fallen in yesterday seemed gone. The walls were no longer lined with familiar photographs but instead stretched into endless darkness, corners folding impossibly into one another. For a moment, she wondered if she was dreaming. But the weight of her own panic, the ache in her limbs, told her this was real, or at least, a new kind of reality. She pushed herself upright and crept toward the front door, hoping for some sense of normalcy, some glimpse of the outside world that could anchor her sanity. The door looked the same as it had the day before, weathered wood and rusted hinges, yet when she opened it, the world beyond had subtly shifted. The familiar gravel driveway now curved in unnatural angles. Trees she remembered planted as small saplings loomed impossibly tall, their branches twisting like grasping fingers. The sky above was a muted gray, too still, too heavy, pressing down on her shoulders. Claire's heart hammered as she moved cautiously toward the street. But as she glanced into the houses across the road, something made her stop cold. There were no people. No cars. Even the mailbox at the corner of the street had vanished. It was as if the neighborhood had been erased, folded into some parallel version of reality. Panic clawed at her chest. Had the house eaten everything outside as well? She reached into her bag for the photograph album she had brought from the bedroom. The pages shook slightly in her hands, as if alive. When she opened it, she gasped. The images of her parents, her friends, her childhood home and happier times, every one had vanished. Blank pages stared back at her. And then, on the very last page, she saw herself. But she was smaller than she should be, pale and featureless, standing in a frame of darkness, as if she were a ghost waiting to step fully into the house's grasp. The whispers returned. Soft, layered, insistent. You're alone now, you're the last one. The sound came not from inside the house but from the air around her, the street, the trees themselves. She spun around, but the neighborhood was still empty. Even the distant hum of cars had vanished. Time itself seemed to be stretching and bending, as if the house's influence was bleeding into reality. Desperate, Claire ran back inside, slamming the door behind her. She tried to calm herself, but the house would not let her. Every photograph she touched quivered violently, pages flipping on their own, revealing her face, sometimes smiling, sometimes screaming, sometimes blank. The house was not just feeding on her memories, it was shaping them, rewriting them, erasing her presence from the world entirely. As she backed into the hallway, she noticed the walls were lined with mirrors she had never seen before. Her reflection stared back, hollow eyes, a slightly twisted grin, her hair falling in unnatural angles. She reached out to touch the glass, and her hand met not a reflection but a photograph embedded in the mirror itself. The image warped under her touch, her body dissolving slowly into nothingness, leaving only the faintest outline. Suddenly, the whispers rose into a chorus of screams. Photographs lifted off the dresser, the bed, and the floor, swirling around her in a cyclone of faces and memories. The room grew darker, tighter, as if the walls themselves were breathing, shrinking, pulling her into the center. Claire's mind raced. She realized, with a terror so profound it made her knees buckle, that the house didn't merely eat photographs or memories, it consumed existence. Each missing face from the photos was no longer remembered in the world. Each vanishing had already begun to erase itself from reality. If she didn't escape, if she didn't somehow resist, the world outside would forget she had ever existed. Her friends, her colleagues, even strangers who had glimpsed her in passing, they would not remember her. She would be swallowed entirely. And then she heard it, a soft click, like a camera shutter. She spun toward the sound. On the far wall, a large, gilded frame had appeared overnight. Within it was a photograph of herself, standing in the hallway she had just been in, smiling. Except the smile wasn't hers. It was wide, unnatural, empty. And behind her in the photograph were countless shadows, faintly humanoid, waiting, watching. The whispers merged into a single voice, "Step into the frame, join the others, we are waiting for you." Before she could react, the frame expanded, the surface rippling like water, and the shadows within stretched their hands toward her. The room twisted. The mirrors reflected her in infinite iterations, each version fading slightly, erasing her from each reflection in turn. Panic consumed her completely as she realized the full truth. The house was not just a prison, nor just a consumer of memories. It was a predator of reality itself. And she was next. Claire realizes the house is erasing her not just from photographs, but from reality itself. Every memory of her outside the house is starting to vanish. The frame and the shadows are reaching for her. Claire's breath came in shallow, ragged gasps as she stumbled backward, eyes fixed on the rippling photograph frame. The shadows within it shifted, stretching unnaturally, writhing like smoke made solid. She wanted to scream, but her voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence of the house. Every instinct in her screamed to run, but the floor beneath her seemed to ripple as if alive, each step threatening to swallow her whole. Her eyes darted to the scattered photographs across the room. A thought struck her: if the house fed on images, perhaps she could fight it with them. She snatched the albums from the bed, clutching them tightly to her chest. Maybe, just maybe, she could regain control, anchor herself through the memories the house hadn't yet consumed. Frantically, she opened an album and began flipping through the pages, searching for an image of herself that remained untouched, a memory untainted. A photo from her childhood appeared, her mother holding her hand as they walked through a sunlit garden. For a brief moment, Claire felt a surge of hope. She traced the outline of her younger self with trembling fingers. The image shivered but did not fade. She pressed it to her forehead. The shadows recoiled. A low, guttural growl emanated from the corners of the room. The walls vibrated, and the whispers rose again, sharper, angrier. "No, you cannot remember yourself, not alone." The voices sounded closer now, circling her from every angle. She could feel the weight of the missing people, their vanished selves pressing down, stretching, folding the air around her. Desperation clawed at her chest. She grabbed more photographs, pressing each to her skin, chanting the names of the people in them, trying to summon the memories they contained. The shadows lunged, writhing across the floor, walls, and ceiling like living ink, but the photos formed a protective barrier, faint at first, flickering with an otherworldly glow. Every memory she called out made the shadows falter, giving her room to breathe. But the house was relentless. The mirror walls began to distort further, her reflections twisting into grotesque parodies of herself, mocking her, warning her that resistance was futile. The larger photograph frame trembled, cracking at the edges. The shadows surged toward it as though drawn to its surface, merging into an endless, writhing mass. Claire realized the frame was a gateway, a portal through which the house could reach beyond the walls of her mind and consume the essence of her existence. panic turned to resolve. She needed to act decisively. Claire tore pages from the albums, scattering them across the room. The images lifted from the paper, floating in the air, a halo of flickering memories. Faces smiled, laughed, cried, and each image resonated with the energy of the life it had once captured. The shadows recoiled again, their forms writhing in pain as if the house itself recoiled from the light of preserved memory. Sweat streamed down her face, her chest heaving, as she realized the truth. The house did not just feed on memory, it fed on erasure, on the disappearance of acknowledgement. To fight it, she had to assert herself, her existence, force the house to see her, not as a blank page, but as a being of flesh, blood, and memory. She sprinted to the frame, holding aloft the floating photographs like talismans. The shadows lunged with furious speed, trying to swallow the images, but Claire pressed forward. The frame quivered, splintering along the edges. For the first time, the air felt less oppressive, less thick, as though the house sensed it might lose its grip. Then she stopped. A chilling realization froze her in place. The photographs in her hands were beginning to vanish. Faces blinked out midair, leaving only faint white outlines. The house wasn't weakened, it was adapting. Every attempt she made to assert her presence, every memory she invoked, the house consumed and learned, growing stronger, smarter. Her heart sank. If she didn't find a permanent anchor, if she didn't somehow reclaim the photographs in a way that could resist the house's hunger, she would vanish completely, not just from the albums, but from reality itself. And worse, she might already be too late. She glanced at the mirror walls. Her reflection flickered violently, and for a split second, the face staring back wasn't hers at all. It was empty, featureless, waiting to replace her entirely. A whisper, soft but unmistakable, crawled into her ear. The last one remains. Will you join us, or vanish? Claire's hands trembled. She realized the fight wasn't just for her life, it was for her very existence. Every memory she could recall, every image she could salvage, was a weapon. She had to act. She had to confront the heart of the house, the place where the photographs fed and twisted reality itself. And so, clutching the remnants of her albums, she began walking toward the staircase again, toward the attic. The attic her parents had always kept locked. The place she had avoided as a child. The place she now knew held the source of the house's terrible power. Every step creaked beneath her weight. The shadows pulsed around her like living smoke, trying to clutch at her legs, her arms, even her hair. The photographs she carried glowed faintly, quivering like trapped fireflies, the only defense against the darkness encroaching from every direction. She reached the attic door. Her hand shook as she turned the knob. It was ice cold. A low hum emanated from within, vibrating through her bones. Claire swallowed her fear and stepped inside. The attic was empty, empty and endless. Dust swirled in the weak light, and in the center of the room, she saw it, a small wooden box, carved with intricate, almost hypnotic symbols. It pulsed faintly, emitting a soft green glow. She knew without knowing why, the box was the heart of the house, the source of its power, the anchor controlling every photograph, every memory, every shadow. As she reached for it, the whispers converged into a roar, deafening, screaming, clawing at the edges of her mind. You cannot take it, you cannot leave, the house remembers you. Claire gritted her teeth, and with every ounce of strength she had left, she lifted the box. Claire finds the heart of the house's power in the attic, a mysterious box controlling the photographs and memories, but the shadows in the house itself rise to prevent her from. Claire's fingers tightened around the wooden box, feeling its pulse beneath her skin, a heartbeat synchronized with the shadows that now swirled menacingly around the attic. The whispers had become a deafening cacophony, 1,000 voices screaming her name, crying, laughing, mocking her. They weren't just sounds. They were sensations, pressing into her skull, burrowing into her thoughts, bending her perception. She realized with a shiver that the house wasn't merely alive, it was sentient. Every fear she felt, every memory she recalled, every thought she dared to entertain, it sensed instantly and twisted to its advantage. The box's green glow intensified, casting eerie shadows across the attic walls. She hesitated, trembling, knowing that inside lay the core of the house's horrifying power. Every photograph she had held, every memory she had tried to protect, had been drawn into this epicenter. And now, she had it in her hands. Could she use it to fight back, or was she already too late? Summoning every ounce of courage, Claire pressed the lid open. A sudden rush of cold air swept the attic, like the exhale of 1,000 vanished souls. The box was empty, or at least, seemingly so. But a strange light emanated from within, spiraling upward into a misty column. She felt herself pulled forward, compelled by some force both terrifying and irresistible. Her own reflection in the attic's warped windows rippled as if the glass were liquid, showing not just her face but multiple versions of herself, each fading more with every blink. And then she realized, the house could manipulate photographs in real time. It could anticipate her every move, distort reality, and warp memory. Every thought she had about the box, every strategy she considered, the house was already rewriting it, turning it against her. If she tried to use the box to save herself, it could trap her deeper. Every instinct screamed for her to run, but escape was impossible. The house had already begun stretching and folding the attic into impossible geometries, walls bending into ceilings, staircases spiraling into oblivion. A photograph floated up from the pile she had brought, twisting in midair. She recognized it immediately, a snapshot of her as a child, smiling in the sunlight of the garden behind her house. But something was wrong. Her parents weren't there. And her own body seemed slightly translucent, flickering between presence and absence. As the image hovered before her, a whisper, familiar and terrible, hissed from its edges, "You are already part of us. You can never leave." The shadows lunged. They weren't just shadows anymore, they had substance, sinew, faces emerging and disappearing, twisting and stretching grotesquely. One reached out with clawed hands, passing through her arm like smoke yet gripping tightly, drawing coldness through her veins. Claire screamed and slammed the box shut, shoving it between herself and the shadows. The attic shook violently, dust raining from the ceiling as the whispers rose to a crescendo. Claire pressed her back against the far wall, breathing in ragged gasps. Every corner of the room seemed to pulse, alive with malicious intent. And then she noticed the floorboards, the photographs scattered across them were writhing, crawling like insects, forming patterns she didn't understand, symbols of control the house used to manipulate reality. She could see her own erased self within the prints, the faint outlines of limbs and facial features disappearing even as she watched. Her mind raced. If the box controlled the photographs, and the photographs controlled the house's influence over reality, then perhaps she could reclaim her existence by using it. But the house was not passive, it would warp anything she tried to do, twisting intentions into traps. She needed precision. She needed focus. And most terrifying of all, she realized she could no longer trust her own memory. The house had been eating it, fragment by fragment. Claire forced herself to breathe, closing her eyes for a moment. She whispered the names of everyone she remembered, all the people she loved, all the moments that had defined her. The box pulsed in response, warmth seeping into her fingers. For a fleeting moment, the shadows recoiled, the photographs stilled, and she felt, just for a second, that she had the upper hand. But then the attic door slammed shut with a force that rattled the windows. The whispers returned, sharper, angrier, filled with malice. "We remember, and soon, you will forget yourself completely." The photographs lifted again, circling her like predatory birds. Faces blinked, twisted, and merged into one monstrous visage, a composite of every person erased by the house. It gazed at her with hollow eyes, its mouth stretching impossibly wide as it shrieked silently in the language of memories devoured. Claire gritted her teeth, pressing the box against her chest. She knew she had a choice: surrender to the house and allow herself to vanish, or confront the impossible, risking everything to reclaim her own existence. As the shadows lunged once more, she clenched her fists, focused on the photographs she held, and shouted her own name, asserting her presence with every ounce of strength. The room exploded in light and sound. Photographs spun in midair, the green glow from the box merging with the flickering images, creating a radiant whirlwind of memory and reality. The shadows screamed and recoiled, faltering for the first time. The house groaned, walls buckling, mirrors cracking, as if struggling against her sudden defiance. Claire felt something inside her shift, the faint recognition of herself that had been eaten by the house slowly returning. But even as hope surged, she knew the house would not surrender willingly. It had survived countless attempts before hers, each victim swallowed and replaced. And now, it would fight harder than ever. Claire's fingers still clutched the wooden box, its green pulse steady in her hands, but her mind raced faster than ever. The attic had transformed again, walls warped, ceilings slanted impossibly, and the floor rippled beneath her feet. Shadows still lingered, swirling, but now they paused at the edges, hesitant, almost as though the box had slowed their advance. Her momentary victory was fragile, and she knew it. She needed answers. She needed to understand what she was fighting before she could hope to survive. The house had secrets, ancient and hungry. Claire's gaze fell upon a loose floorboard near the far corner of the attic. It wasn't there before, or perhaps it had been carefully concealed. With trembling hands, she pried it up, revealing a narrow, spiraling staircase descending into darkness. A faint light glimmered at the bottom, green and otherworldly, echoing the pulse of the box. She hesitated. Every instinct screamed danger, but the compulsion to know, to uncover the source of the house's hunger, outweighed her fear. The staircase seemed endless. Each step groaned under her weight, vibrating with a low hum that resonated deep in her chest. Whispers followed her, not angry this time, but soft, deliberate, almost instructive, fragments of voices she couldn't fully distinguish, whispers of past victims, hints of what had come before. She pressed on, guided by the box's glow and a growing sense that the answers she sought lay just ahead. At the bottom, the space opened into a cavernous chamber. Walls were lined with old photographs, hundreds, maybe thousands, each suspended midair in a greenish haze. They depicted generations of people, some smiling, some screaming, some blank. And then Claire saw it, a massive, gnarled wooden frame in the center, etched with intricate, almost arcane symbols. The box in her hands pulsed in harmony with it. The chamber felt alive, breathed, pulsed, and waited. Claire approached cautiously. As she neared the frame, a chill swept the room, and a voice, deep and resonant, filled the chamber. "You wish to know why we hunger." The words came not from a single source but all around her, vibrating in the air and walls. The photographs fluttered like leaves in a storm, forming shapes that suggested faces, hundreds of eyes staring at her. She looked at the frame and saw within it the earliest images the house had consumed. They were blurry at first, then sharpened, faces of children, parents, strangers, even herself at various ages. And then a revelation struck her: the house didn't consume out of malice or randomness. It was feeding on memory, yes, but more than that, it preserved existence in a twisted form. Every person it took was trapped forever in the photographs, living on in an alternate, distorted reality. The house remembered what the world forgot. A creeping horror settled in her chest. Preservation through erasure. The house didn't just eat memories, it rewrote reality to replace those it had taken. And anyone who resisted for too long became a permanent inhabitant of its archive, an image trapped in the photographs, forever consumed yet still visible. Her parents, her childhood friends, all those who had disappeared, they weren't gone. They were part of this chamber, part of the house itself. The whispers surged, more urgent now. "Do you understand? Join us, or vanish. It is your choice." Claire's hands shook as the box pulsed violently, as if aware of her understanding. She realized the horrifying truth: the house wasn't evil in the human sense. It was an ancient entity, a predator of memory and identity, designed to consume existence to sustain itself. And she was standing at the center of its heart, fully aware of its rules. Every photograph she had tried to protect, every memory she had recalled, now had a cost. She had only delayed the inevitable. The house adapted, always hungrier, always smarter. Desperation clawed at her, but she forced herself to breathe. She could see how the box resonated with the frame. If she could merge them, perhaps she could wrest control, anchor herself, and undo some of the damage, but the risk was staggering. One misstep, one hesitation, and she would vanish completely, becoming yet another face trapped in the house's ever-growing archive. The shadows began to rise from the floor again, denser, more defined, reaching for her, probing at the edges of her mind. The photographs hovered, forming a cyclone of faces, some screaming, some smiling, all blurred, all twisted by the house's influence. Claire knew there was no turning back. She had to act, or she would be consumed. And as she lifted the box higher, the whispers coalesced into a final warning, bone-chilling in its clarity: use it, but remember, the house always remembers. Her chest tightened, pulse racing. Every instinct screamed that she was standing on the precipice of something terrible, a choice that would determine not just her survival, but the fate of the countless souls trapped in the house's photographs. She gritted her teeth, bracing herself. The house waited. Claire's hands trembled as she held the box above the carved frame, its green pulse flickering in tandem with the shadows swirling around her. The air in the chamber was thick, suffocating, charged with the weight of countless memories, stolen lives, and lingering presences. The photographs in the air trembled violently, faces twisting, mouths opening in silent screams. The house itself seemed to shift, walls bending, ceiling rippling, as if it were aware of her intentions and resisting with every fiber of its being. She swallowed hard, trying to focus. The box's glow pulsed stronger in her hands, responding to her intent. It wasn't just a key or a weapon, it was a conduit, a channel through which she could reach the house's core, the source of its hunger. If she could merge it with the frame, perhaps she could reclaim control, restore the stolen memories, and maybe, just maybe, escape unconsumed. The shadows surged. Dark, liquid tendrils reached for her, trying to snatch the box from her grasp. She pressed forward, feet sliding across the warped floor, ignoring the crushing weight in her chest, the whispers clawing at her mind. The photographs spun around her like a cyclone of faces, some pleading, some accusing, all flickering in and out of existence. Each image seemed to pull at her sanity, reminding her of the countless people trapped within the house, the countless identities erased. "Focus," she shouted to herself, gripping the box tighter. "You are not one of them." With a trembling hand, she lowered the box into the carved frame at the chamber's center. The green light surged, exploding outward in a brilliant halo that bathed the room. The shadows shrieked, recoiling violently, twisting into grotesque forms that writhed and then dissipated into nothingness. The photographs froze midair, the faces within them blinking rapidly, flickering between distorted images and moments of clarity. Claire felt a shock ripple through her body, a pulse that resonated deep in her chest. Memories, hers and others, flowed toward the frame, streaming like ribbons of light. She saw flashes of her childhood friends, her parents, people she barely remembered, all trapped in the house's archive. They were reaching toward her, silent pleas radiating from their images. A terrible truth pressed against her consciousness: the house was not merely a predator, it was a collector, preserving existence in the only way it knew how, but in doing so, it erased the present, devouring those it touched. The whispers merged into one omnipresent voice: "You cannot control us. You cannot undo what we are. You will join us, as all others have." Claire's pulse raced, but she forced herself to calm her breathing, to channel the strength she hadn't known she possessed. She placed her hands on the frame and the box simultaneously, willing herself to merge the energies, to assert her presence against the consuming will of the house. The chamber trembled violently, the floor buckling beneath her, but she held firm, anchoring herself through every memory she still had. The photographs reacted. Faces she recognized, the people she loved, glowed brightly, their features sharpening for the first time in decades. The shadows shrieked and writhed, lashing out, but the light of the box and frame surged, pushing back the darkness. Claire felt something shift inside her, a deep resonance connecting her to the stolen memories, linking her to the house in a fragile, tenuous symbiosis. But the house was not defeated. It adapted instantly. The chamber distorted further, stretching into impossible geometries, walls folding in on themselves. The whispers became a storm of voices, mocking her, taunting her, warning her that every victory was temporary. She realized with a chilling clarity, the house did not just consume, it learned. Every attempt to resist, every spark of defiance, became part of its strategy, a way to tighten its grip on reality. Claire gasped as one of the photographs hovered before her, flickering violently. Her own face stared back, featureless, blank, waiting to replace her in the frame. The house was testing her, probing her will, showing her the possible future of total erasure. Panic surged, but she clutched the box tighter, forcing herself to focus on the memories she wanted to save, to fight for existence itself. The chamber shook again, violently this time, and she felt herself lifted slightly off the floor, caught in a vortex of light and shadow. Faces spun around her, twisting, merging, some screaming, some pleading. And then, in the chaos, a singular thought anchored her: she could not just fight for herself. She had to fight for every lost soul the house had consumed. Every erased face, every stolen memory, she had to bring them back. With a cry, she projected every memory she could recall, every photograph she had held, every feeling of love and belonging she had ever known, into the frame. The green light surged into a blinding column, the shadows shrieking, dissolving, retreating as the photographs solidified, their faces returning, clarity replacing distortion. For a fleeting, impossible moment, the house's grip faltered. But Claire knew better than to celebrate. The house was ancient, adaptive, and patient. It would not be defeated so easily. She had bought herself time, reclaimed fragments of existence, but the battle was far from over. And somewhere deep within the house, in the shadows she could not yet reach, the core of its hunger pulsed, waiting, patient, and aware of her every move. Claire staggered back from the glowing frame, her lungs burning, sweat streaming down her face. The attic, or what she understood to be the attic, shook violently, the floor rippling underfoot. The shadows had retreated for the moment, but the air still thrummed with the whispers of countless stolen memories. The house was alive, watching, learning, its patience infinite. Each flicker of light from the frame pulsed like a heartbeat, echoing through the warped walls, resonating with the stolen fragments of existence she had begun to reclaim. She held the box close, realizing it was more than a tool, it was a tether, a lifeline. Without it, she would be nothing more than another erased face in the house's endless archive. And yet, even with it, she felt a creeping unease. Every time she glanced at her own reflection in the warped mirrors lining the chamber, she saw her face shift subtly, hollow eyes, faint blurs where features should have been. The house was beginning to rewrite her. A whisper crawled into her ear, sibilant and omnipresent: "You resist, but you forget yourself. We are patient, we are eternal, join us." The words weren't just heard, they burrowed into her mind, threatening to replace her will with the collective consciousness of the house. She clutched the box tighter, forcing herself to remember everything: her childhood, her parents' faces, the friends she had loved and lost, the sensations of sunlight on her skin, the taste of rain. The green light of the box surged violently, casting shadows that stretched and warped around the room. Photographs swirled in a chaotic vortex, spinning, twisting, faces merging, separating, fading, and then returning. Claire realized she could use the box not just to reclaim memories but to anchor herself, to assert her identity against the house's hunger. But the cost would be immense. To survive, she would need to commit every ounce of herself, every memory, every thought, to the frame. There would be no turning back. She approached the glowing frame again, her reflection flickering violently in the mirrors. Each step was agony, as if the house itself resisted her presence, trying to rewrite her before she could reach the heart of it. The shadows surged once more, denser, faster, clawing at her legs, arms, even her mind. Faces twisted into grotesque parodies of the people she loved, merging into monstrous visages that hissed and screeched, warning her of oblivion. Claire placed the box into the frame once more, this time pressing her palms flat against it, letting the green pulse flow through her, merging her consciousness with the energy within. She felt the stolen memories, the ones she had just reclaimed, flowing into her, tethering her existence to the heart of the house. It was a strange sensation, like touching the lives of everyone who had been consumed, feeling their loss and their presence simultaneously. The house reacted immediately. The floor groaned, walls buckled, and the shadows became torrents of liquid darkness, twisting and lunging toward her, trying to pull her into the void. Her reflection flickered violently, half her, half the blank, erased figure the house wanted her to become. Panic surged, but she forced herself to focus, concentrating on each memory, each photograph, each stolen identity she had witnessed. She asserted herself, shouting her own name into the chaos. I am Claire. I exist. For a moment, the house faltered. The shadows recoiled, the photographs stilled, and a strange clarity settled over the chamber. The green light from the frame pulsed, resonating with her heartbeat. Faces in the photographs smiled faintly, as though recognizing her struggle, lending her strength. She realized that for the first time, she had a measure of control. She could push back, reclaim the memories the house had consumed, even restore fragments of reality it had begun to erase. But the house was relentless. It adapted instantly, warping the chamber into impossible geometries. Mirrors multiplied, reflections fracturing into infinite iterations, each version of herself slightly less real, slightly more consumed. The whispers intensified, now a hurricane of voices demanding surrender, erasing, rewriting, fragmenting her consciousness. Claire gritted her teeth. This was the final test. She could feel herself fragmenting, memory by memory, as the house tried to override her identity. She pressed the box harder against the frame, letting the green pulse flood through her, and shouted again, I am here. I remember. I exist. The chamber exploded in blinding light. Shadows screamed and twisted, photographs hovered and solidified, and the house convulsed violently. Claire felt herself lifted, caught between the force of her own assertion and the house's adaptive hunger. Every memory she had, every stolen fragment, every identity she had touched flowed into the frame, intertwining with her own consciousness. And then, for a heartbeat, the chaos stopped. The chamber was silent. The shadows had withdrawn, the photographs floated calmly in the air, their faces clear, their features intact. Claire's reflection returned fully, unmistakably her own. She had survived. For now. But the house was patient. Ancient. Adaptive. It had learned from her defiance. She could feel it lurking in the corners of her mind, waiting for the first sign of weakness. And she knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that the final confrontation was yet to come. Claire stood in the center of the chamber, the wooden box still clutched to her chest, its green pulse synchronized with her racing heartbeat. The shadows had withdrawn, yet the air was thick with anticipation, as if the house itself were holding its breath, waiting for her next move. Every photograph floating in the room shimmered faintly, faces of the consumed and the lost gazing at her silently. She realized that what she had accomplished, reclaiming fragments of memory, asserting her identity, was only a temporary reprieve. The house was patient, eternal, and now aware of the depths of her defiance. She moved toward the massive carved frame, which now radiated a light so intense it cast the entire chamber in eerie emerald brilliance. the energy from the box pulsed through her, sending waves of warmth and fear through her body simultaneously. For the first time, she understood the full magnitude of the house's power. It did not simply consume photographs, it consumed existence itself, twisting reality, erasing identities, preserving fragments of life as distorted images in an endless archive. And now, it sought to make her the final proof of its dominion. The whispers returned, louder, urgent, a chorus of millions. You cannot resist. You will become us. Your memories will feed the walls, your existence will be rewritten. Their tone was not merely threatening, it was instructional, as if guiding her toward her own erasure. Her reflection in the mirror shivered, flickering between herself and the blank, erased figure that the house wanted her to become. Panic clawed at her, but she forced herself to breathe, to remember, to focus. Claire lifted the box above the frame, intending to merge fully with its energy. She could feel the stolen memories swirling around her, the echoes of countless lives, the laughter and screams of people she had never met. She realized that each photograph, each stolen fragment of reality, was a test, a fragment of the house's consciousness. To survive, she would have to assert herself completely, not just fight the shadows, but challenge the house's very will. As she lowered the box, the green light flared, and the photographs reacted violently. Faces twisted, merging, separating, some screaming, others frozen in fear. The shadows lunged with unprecedented speed, thick and suffocating, pressing in from every corner. For a moment, Claire felt herself being torn apart, mind and body stretched thin, memories slipping through her fingers like water. She screamed, focusing on every detail of her life she could remember, the smell of her childhood home, the sound of her mother's laugh, the warmth of sunlight on her skin, the feeling of rain dripping down her shoulders. And then she understood the truth the house had been concealing. It had never intended to destroy her. The house was a repository, a guardian of existence through consumption. Every person it had taken was preserved, yes, but only as long as the house could feed on their memory. If the memories faded, the individual vanished completely. The house did not hate, it merely required sustenance. And now, Claire realized with a cold clarity, she was not the first to reach this understanding. She could either surrender and be preserved in distortion, or she could attempt something unprecedented, to feed the house intentionally, to control its hunger rather than resist it. Her pulse quickened. She could see the final choice laid bare before her. She could step fully into the frame, allowing herself to become one with the house, gaining a measure of control over its influence. She could attempt to restore the stolen identities, to release them back into the world, or at least preserve them in clarity within the photographs. But if she hesitated, if fear overtook her, the house would consume her completely, and she would be erased, her existence forgotten by everyone, even the walls that had fed on her. The shadows surged one final time, writhing like living smoke, tendrils reaching for her. Claire's reflection flickered, distorted and incomplete. She pressed the box fully into the carved frame, feeling a pulse of energy that reverberated through the chamber, through her body, through the very air itself. Memories flooded her, fragments of lives stolen across decades, blending with her own. She felt the identities of the missing, the vanished, the erased, intertwining with her consciousness. And then, she stepped into the frame. The photographs swirled violently, faces merging into a tapestry of light and shadow. The house groaned, the walls buckled, and for an instant, it seemed as though reality itself was tearing apart. Claire felt herself dissolving, but not in fear. She felt herself expanding, her consciousness linking with every fragment the house had consumed. She was everywhere and nowhere, a singular presence intertwined with countless others. The final revelation struck her with horrifying clarity. The house was not merely a predator, it was a mirror of humanity's own forgetfulness. It preserved those who were forgotten, those erased by time, by neglect, by absence. And in its twisted logic, Claire had become the conduit through which the house would finally achieve a semblance of understanding, a balance between erasure and preservation. When she opened her eyes, Or rather, when her consciousness returned, she was back in the attic, the box still glowing faintly in her hands. The shadows had receded completely. The photographs floated gently, faces clear, whole, smiling faintly as if acknowledging her courage. She realized that she had survived, not by defeating the house, but by integrating herself into its purpose, asserting her identity while allowing it to feed, preserving both herself and the countless lost souls. For the first time, the house felt quiet, still. She could hear whispers, but they were soft, almost like a sigh, as though the house were content, for now. Claire knew this was temporary. The house was ancient, patient, and always hungry. But she had found a way to survive, a way to live within its walls while preserving the memories of those it had consumed. Claire took a deep breath, stepping away from the frame. The attic felt lighter. The photographs hung suspended in a delicate balance of memory and reality. She knew she could never leave the house fully, not entirely, but she had carved a space for herself within its heart, a measure of control, a tether to her own existence. She had faced oblivion and had emerged not entirely unscathed, but alive, aware, and remembered. And somewhere deep in the walls, in the pulse of every photograph, she knew the house was waiting. Patient. Watching. Always hungry. But now, she was part of it, part of the memory it preserved, part of the eternal tapestry of lives it had consumed. She smiled faintly, a shiver running down her spine, knowing that while the story had ended, for her, at least, the house's hunger would continue, ever patient, ever aware, waiting for the next soul brave or foolish enough to step inside. The house wasn't evil, it was a preserver, feeding on memory to sustain existence. Claire's survival depended not on escaping, but on integrating herself into its purpose, asserting her identity while allowing the house to feed. She becomes both a survivor and a part of the house, tethered to its eternal, hungry heart.